Welcome to segment 4 of Emotions and the Aging Process. I'm Naomi Arenberg, very happy to once again join Dr. Ron Cepitelli. Hi, Ron.
Hi, Naomi.
Today we're going to be talking about the stress that healthcare professionals undergo, particularly nursing aides. And I have the feeling that this is a topic that a lot of viewers have experienced, have considered. Will you start with something that might sound not entirely relevant, but really is? It's one of the heartbeats of our subject today, the stress that comes with being a healthcare professional. The process of what's called rounds. What are rounds in a nursing care facility?
Well, what rounds are is that the physician and a group of staff members, usually a nurse, and maybe an aide, they meet and they discuss patients and discuss physical needs or emotional needs of the patients or residents and so forth. Now, after they're discussed and information has come in from aides and from nurses and other staff members, then they decide of the patients they're going to visit. Then they go to patients and they visit the patients and they ask about, oh, Mary, we understand your stomach hurts today. Oh, yes, it does. And the doctor will ask questions or manipulate her in some type of a way. And they move on from patient to patient. It's about the physical body. It's about what's going on. If there are any emotional issues, what will happen is they will ask the patient some questions and then order usually medication.
Okay, so let's recap that briefly. Because I think you said at the top it was about a review of emotions and the physical self.
Correct.
But it's really primarily focused on the physical body and how to fix a physical or emotional issue with meds.
Correct. One of the things that frustrated me when I first started my externship in a nursing home was that every time we did rounds, they were always social, emotional issues came up with residents, and never did they ever ask me a question. They would just ask the doctor the question, and then he would answer it, and he wouldn't refer to me either. He would just say, okay, let's try this, let's try that. Whether it's two patients fighting with each other, or a patient sleeping too much, or not being able to sleep, or yelling, or anything, they would just kind of review the medications and say, oh, he's taking this and taking that, maybe that's affecting him, maybe we should put less of this or less of that medication, and so on.
So there's a physician, can you give us a specific example? There's a physician who's with the staff and you,
Yep.
going patient to patient to patient, and the day-to-day on-the-ground staff says something like, Dr. Smith, we're visiting Ron. Sorry, let me come up with a different name. Dr. Smith, we're visiting Bill. Bill screamed all through last night.
Yep.
And you, Dr. Cepitelli, are sort of standing,
Yep.
You're just decorative.
Correct.
And the doctor might say about Bill,
Yep.
what might he say?
He might say, does he have a sleep medication? What is he taking to sleeping? Or he'll know, oh, he's been taking Zyprexa or something. Maybe we should reduce that, and so forth.
Which is a what kind of drug?
Depression drug.
Okay. Okay. So, and it's not involving the patient either.
Correct. Yep. Now they will visit the patient and they will go and ask, the doctor will go and talk to the patient, but it's medically informed. It's about medicine. Okay?
Which is an important part.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, that's why they're there. I mean, they're too sick to be at home. All right? They can't walk, they can't feed themselves, they can't dress themselves, and they can't toilet themselves. That's why people are in a nursing home.
Could we say, though, that, throughout our lives, we, if we're healthy, in the fullest sense of the word, we're aware that we have physical selves and emotional selves, and psychological, if you can separate that out. And then suddenly, if we're older and or infirm and unable to take care of ourselves, then suddenly it's only the physical self that gets attention.
That's right.
Is that part of the problem?
Well, yes, okay, that a part of the biggest problem is that the residents really aren't listened to. Now the staff will say, yes, I listened to him, he said this, and I say, okay, I'll get you that, and so forth. But they're really not just, they're listening to the resident, trying to understand what the resident is talking about means. Okay?
So to get back to rounds and the impact all of this has on the working life of the nurses' aides, bring them into this picture, please.
Okay. A lot of the information the docs get come from the aides. So an aide in the morning gets a resident out of bed. They do kind of a quick scan of the body, see if there's any bruises or swelling or anything seems different, they're talking different and so forth. So then they report on that. So that's how it originally starts. So the aide sees or hears something from a resident, and they do the vital signs on them also. Now, what are residents' jobs? Residents' jobs are essentially task-oriented. So when, let's say, the first shift comes in, their job is to get the people up, get them dressed.
So, excuse me, the aides' jobs?
Yes.
Okay.
The aides'
so the
job
aides' jobs.
is to get the residents up, get them dressed, get them to breakfast. Okay? So that, however how many aides of residents an aide has will determine how that will go. Some places have a resident has 5 or 6 residents, or aide has 5 or 6 residents. Other places, 12 and even 15 residents. So you can see there's going to be a problem here with an aide just fulfilling her duties, her tasks for the day.
That's just mind-boggling.
Yeah.
So, okay. I will hold on to my questions for a little bit later. Can you bring this back to the life, the stress that this engenders for the caregivers? We're focusing on the
Yes.
aides right now.
Yeah.
So the aides have this responsibility, and they lead the physician through rounds.
Yep. They don't lead them. I mean, they're not. The aides have told the nurse, okay, and the nurse brings it to the attention of the physician, and then the physician determines which patients they're going to see.
Okay. So tell us about the emotional life of an aide in this particular situation.
Well, again, as I mentioned, the aide's job is task-oriented. So as soon as something interferes with their tasks, the aide's emotions increase, okay, negative emotions. They get stressed. And this could be even before they start work. For example, if you got, each aide has 8 residents to work with, and they walk in for the shift and they say, oh, 1 aide didn't show up today. So we are short 1 aide. So that means what to the aides that are working there? They've got to do more residents to get more residents up. Then, so that, again, so their stress immediately starts. So now they start getting patients up. And they know their patients, and they tend to get the easier ones up first. So ones that maybe can help themselves even get dressed a little bit, or sit on the edge of the bed, or they can talk to, and so forth. So they get them dressed, they get them to the dining room, or and get them eating. So then they go to the more difficult residents. And by difficult, I mean physically difficult, okay? And sometimes it takes 2 aides, and they use Hoyer lifts and these electronic lifts and so forth to get the patient up out of bed and on the toilet and so forth and so on. It's a lot of work. And sometimes when they're waking the resident up, the resident is maybe in a hypnagogic state. That means it's half asleep, half awake. So they're kind of yelling something about a dream they're having, and they may strike a resident, grope a resident. In my research, one of the things the aides talked about was most stressful is residents groping them, certain residents, when they're female, it doesn't matter. And I think it's just more of a reaction by the residents, but that affects them, of course, in their work. They're under stress from I have never seen an aide sitting down with their feet up on a desk.
Mm-hmm.
When I see aides, they're working or looking into a computer screen, because everything has to be documented,
Sure.
you know, for the insurance companies.
Sure. So, can you sum up the emotional life in terms of the workplace for these people who have a lot of very important work to do, the aides
Yes.
in a residential home?
Aides tend to be overwhelmed by the situation they're at, and when they get overwhelmed, they, I'm going to put it in quotes, take it out on the residents or other aides or other staff by complaining or quitting. Okay, there's a high turnover for nursing home aides, and they, the aides look for ways to make themselves feel better. Okay? And that is, they will kiss residents or ask residents to give them a kiss, or they'll hug residents and so forth. So they get some good feeling back. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with them doing this, okay? So that's kind of summing it up.
But it sounds as though, we'll get back to this in a moment, the difficulties that they're enduring are not always well attended.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, this is what you're going to see and hear from an aide if you talk to them. These are the things that they will say, and the things that you will see. When I did my project, and when they were able to describe and express themselves, okay, without any fear of retribution or anything, they said a lot more about what was going on and their reactions to them.
So speaking of your work, you wrote a paper and that's relevant to our discussion. There are big words in the title. I'm going to give the whole title anyway. The Psychodynamics of Nursing Home Aides' Interactions with Nursing Home Residents, a Model for Resident-Centered Practice. Okay, a lot of big words. Tell us what it means.
Okay.
It includes something called a theory of terror management.
Yes. So let me tell you how I got to that paper. My original research was going to be to try to determine if aides met with a resident for 40 minutes one time a week, if that would improve the attachment of aides to residents.
One-on-one.
One-on-one. They would move that. They would meet at 5 aides, and myself would meet every 2 weeks for 90 minutes, and they would talk about their meetings with the aides, with the residents, and so forth and so on. That was my original intent. So we got the 5 aides, we got the program started, and so we met with the aides first. I had one 90-minute session for half the session to listen to the residents talk about their work, the aides talk about their work, and then the next 45 to begin some education on what they were going to do. So after the first 45 minutes of the first session, I thought, the research is going in a different direction. I just need to listen to these aides. They talked about residents in a way that was a bit astonishing to me.
Such as?
Such as a resident was either a good resident, that means they didn't ask for anything, or a bad resident was a demanding resident.
Sounds like kids in school.
Yeah, absolutely. And they said things like, I would never want to live in a nursing home. I would never, if I lived in a nursing home, I would be a bad resident. I'd pee on the floor. I'd make everybody angry at me. I'd never give in to this place. Things like that were astonishing to me.
So the aides are saying this.
The aides are saying this. And,
Okay.
and when they're talking about living in a nursing home, one aide said this. She said, I could never live in a nursing home. If I had to live in a nursing home, boom, that's what I'd do.
Wow.
Okay? Now here's something astonishing. After I finished my research, after the whole project was done, maybe a year later, a resident fell out of bed, but some residents have the beds that are like right on the floor and there's mats around them, so the resident fell maybe 8 inches, rolled off her bed, maybe 8 inches. This aide who said that was the first person in the room to see it. Now, both this resident's roommate and another aide told me the same story. This aide bent down over that resident and said, "Why don't you get a gun and end it all right now?" Okay, so what is that? That is a projection of the aide onto the resident about what she would do if she was in this situation. So that gives us quite insight into what's going on in us when we see people who are old, disabled, not human-like.
Or not what fits within our very narrow conception
Absolutely.
of what it means to be human.
Absolutely.
Particularly in our
yes.
society.
So now terror management theory. What I found from using terror management theory, their thesis is this, and they have hundreds of research projects to back this up. And their position is this: if we're among a group of people who are just like us, we are fine, and we will do things that will help the group think better of us, self-esteem raising behaviors. If we're with a group of people who are not like what we think they should be, especially if they make us think of our own death, we will then use self-esteem raising interventions that will denigrate the other person to make us feel better.
That sounds like a theory that would transfer very truthfully through any situation.
That's right.
So again, you used some big words there. This all led up to some recommendations. I actually have in front of me a page of your recommendations. And they have to do with one, staff training. So just first, a brief recap. And again, we are in segment 4 of Emotions and the Aging Process with Dr. Ron Sepitelli. We're talking about the stress that healthcare professionals, particularly the aides, endure and try, with limited success often, to manage. So there are people in this stressful situation, and not to belittle the extreme stress that soldiers in combat undergo, but this does sound analogous.
It's analogous in a sense. It's what's called a quotidian trauma, and that means it's ongoing. Okay, every day it's the same thing. Okay, you get the same kind of negative return from the investment you're putting in. It happens a lot, obviously, with children and when they're in households that there's yelling and so forth and so on. Yeah, so this is what happens in a sense. And that's why there's such high turnover in nursing homes, as much as like 440% in some.
Wait, 440%?
Yeah, the national statistics.
Okay, I'm just going to let you toss that out there and go on to the positive,
Okay.
the recommendations, because
Okay.
we can get past this.
Yes, right, okay. So what really needs to happen is there be ongoing staff training, where the staff learns not only about patients and their physical needs or needs like that, but they need to learn to study when residents say things, to learn how to get underneath that, how to respond them in the way, how to listen receptively. Okay, the techniques and the interventions used so that the person, you're not trying to change the emotions of the person, but you want to join the emotions of the person. And they need to study that, okay, and learn about how that happens and what happens.
Because it takes some practice. They'll have
certainly,
to.
yes, because again, we're going to react. When nursing home aides do, like this nursing home that said, aide that said to that resident, "Why don't you get a gun?" and so forth. I mean, that aide shouldn't be punished for that. Okay, she should be able to talk about that. Okay, she was obviously frustrated about what happened. Maybe this resident had fallen out of bed 10 times in a row. Okay, so finally she just got to her feelings, and these are more primitive feelings. You see, our feelings come from our primitive part of our brain. Our cognition comes from our cerebral cortex, okay, the modern part of the brain. But when the emotions are too strong, what comes out of the cerebral cortex is too influenced by the primitive brain. Okay.
So ongoing staff training. Listening and communicating with residents needs to be the primary interaction of staff members.
Yes.
Really? But
Yeah.
that's what you're saying is not going on.
Correct.
You have rounds, you have these aides who have specific tasks in the physical world to accomplish,
Yeah.
or they will be judged as having not done their jobs well.
Right.
So, all right, let's go through the recommendations and then we might have time to talk about
Okay.
the how. Aides and other staff need a safe, regularly scheduled place and time to talk without being judged, helped, valued, or changed.
That's
You've
right.
mentioned this a couple of times. Anything
Yes.
you'd like to add?
Well, what happens when they're in a safe place? They start talking about these negative things about themselves and others. And the more they can talk about the negative things in themselves, that is safe and appropriate, of course. Okay, you don't swear at people or yell or touch anybody even. Then what will happen, the aides will get to the better parts of themselves. And they will then be motivated to not only try to understand residents and their fellow workers, but they'll also try to understand themselves. And when this happens, a remarkable thing happens, that if this is ongoing, the people in the group, they will then start becoming curious about what's happening, and they'll be developing new ideas and new ways to work with the residents, to work with other people, and so they will provide the new ways to work. We won't need a consultant to come in and tell you how to change things. They'll do it themselves.
That sounds much more effective
It certainly does to me.
than bringing someone in from the outside. And last on this list, questionnaires, observational studies, or focus groups have been the most often used procedures to gather information. Using modern psychoanalytic concepts and techniques in resident/staff communications and group settings may produce more accurate and useful information. Would you give us the layperson's translation of that, please?
Okay. I've done poster presentations of my research, and I've done it in several states and so forth. And when researchers see my poster presentation, they all always make the same comment. They say, how did you get the aides to say those things? Because they said, one researcher told me, we ask questionnaires and we give them, and they say, no, we don't do that, we don't say those things and so forth. But it shows right here that they do say those things and they do think those things.
Those things being, for example?
I hate Mr. Jones, okay? I can't stand to look at him. They'll see a resident they don't like and they'll say, oh, Mary's going to come and get the bell for you. Okay, she'll be right back. They lie to him and so forth, roll their eyes, and these type of things, which you perceive as very, very negative. But actually, if we can get them to talk about those things and what's going on with it, about that, eventually they'll figure out a way to deal with these residents so they won't have to do those behaviors.
So I know our time is limited. How did you get them to talk, to divulge, to get on that therapeutic path? Because the workload is not going to decrease.
Yes.
You've got the aides, you've got the patients, you've got the administration. The work conditions in terms of an aide has to get the patient up, get him breakfasted, toileted, all those things you mentioned, that's not about to change.
Correct.
The only component we might be able to change is the health, the psychological or the emotional health of the workplace.
Right.
How do you do it?
Well, it's actually, it's simple but very difficult. You do that by joining them in their emotions when they're talking about something.
For example, I say,
the patient rolls out of bed. Let's just say that aide comes to me and says, man, Mr. Jones rolls out of bed every day, he's a jerk, he's trying to do that to make me mad. My response, that's frustrating, or that's infuriating, something like that. So I'm joining her emotion. And what you can tell when you're joining, if it's effective when you join someone's emotions, their response back. They'll give you more information. In a case like that, she'll give more information. What happened in my research when they would say these items, I would join their emotions, okay, and then ask them questions about it. Well, what should Mr. Jones be doing? What would be helpful to Mr. Jones? And then they all start throwing in ideas. After maybe halfway through the research, the aides started talking about several residents, males who used to be in like craftsmen or things like that. They talked about talking to somebody about getting woodworking, little things for them to sand or to paint or to do things, because they realized then in meeting with them that these people really wanted to live and do more in life.
That's wonderful.
Yeah.
We're about to conclude this segment 4 of Emotions and the Aging Process. We've concluded with a few very powerful sounding recommendations. And Dr. Ron Ceppetelli, let's remind everyone that there's more information available online at Vermont SMP. That's Vermont, S as in Sam, M as in Mary, P as in professional, .org/emotions, vermontsmp.org/emotions. What else can you add to conclude?
I just had a thought in my mind that I'm going to try to get.
Sure. Well, I can say
Okay.
that segment 5, our next segment, is going to be entitled Environment. What does that mean?
Environment is everything that's going on in the place where the person's being taken care of, like a resident, for example, in a nursing home. For example, the residents often talk a lot about the noise at night, somebody yelling out. They talk about hearing a cart go down the hallways, the wheels wiggling, or they'll say, 5 o'clock in the morning, the vacuum cleaner comes down, and it'll wake them up. But not only that, it's everything else that's encompassed in that environment. All the staff, the building itself, okay, but everything.
Great. Dr. Ron Ceppetelli, thank you ever so much.
Thank you.
We'll see you again next time.
Thank you.
Thanks for watching.